Welcome back to today's anatomy question. I'm Lizzie Lassiter. Teaching us today is Mary Richards. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
We're talking about the bony landmarks of the pelvis. Before we do, I want to show you Mary's website. This is where you can find Ms. Mary Richards, yogawithmaryrichards.com. And we collaborate here at experientialanatomy.yoga, free newsletter and lots of goodies when you sign up. Last thing I want to show you is Mary's book, which is so fabulous. Teach People, Not Poses, Lessons in Yoga, Anatomy, and Functional Movement to Unlock Body Intelligence. I will put the link below the video for you. Mary, tell us one thing about the book.
It's really an invitation to practice on our own terms, to no longer be compliant with rules and laws that are imposed upon us externally. And it's really intended to help us enliven our practice within for each of us as individuals.
Oh, I love that. I really honor the lineage of the practice, but at the same time, what resonates with me is not to ask my teacher's teacher or teacher's teacher's teacher what he thought or what he taught, the kind of received wisdom, the copy pasting that lives throughout the discipline of yoga, but instead to take that as like a data point, a jumping off place for negotiations, and then to learn with you anatomy and to trust my own sensations and my own internal body wisdom.
Yes, because that's really the functional intention of asana in the first place, and I am a total yoga nerd. I have hundreds of books. I read voraciously, I study voraciously, I train with folks. And what my favorite teachers, the way they approach the practice is they teach the person. They're teaching to me rather than teaching rules. And I've certainly taught rules, been taught rules, etc. And what I've found, especially as I've grown in practice and in life, is break the rules. That's why we have rules, is to break them.
Yes. And I mean, I would rather, like, the good thing about breaking a rule is if I know the rule and then I experience something different in my body, at least I'm experiencing interoceptively what's going on in my body. Like, at least I'm, like, I encourage my students to say that absolutely doesn't work for me, doesn't feel right. I disagree strongly. I think I want to practice the pose this way. I'm like, hallelujah. You are feeling something, like you're awake and alive to the real-time internal sensations, like mission accomplished.
Yes, it's not a personal attack. It doesn't invalidate what you know. The reality is, and Parker Palmer, who is an education visionary, writes about this. His book, Courage to Teach, is so fantastic, in my opinion, is we don't actually teach people anything. What we do is we co-create conditions where learning may arise. And learning doesn't arise if we give everyone the answers. Learning arises through interaction and curiosity and, failure. Fail fast, fail forward.
Okay, I just have to share this anecdote with my 3.5-year-old twin boys. What's so crazy is we live in Austria, so it's like skiing, 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 skiing. They've already been skiing since last year. And this season it really kind of took off, the skiing alone and then the skiing on the blue runs. And now with one of the boys, we're on red runs. And what's so fascinating is they've both had probably, exactly the same amount of hours on skis in their life. One of them is so enthusiastic and so gung-ho. For months now, he's been like, no, I only want to ski alone, not between the legs anymore. I can do it. He fell, but he got right. We helped him right back up. And he, like, you cannot, like, get in the way of this kid learning how to ski. Like, and his twin brother, identical experience, identical sort of enthusiastic parents. He's like, no, I want to stay between your legs, not interested in skiing alone. Like, no. Like, and he's slowly creeping out from between the legs. But like, you cannot force Felix to learn to ski. Like, you cannot he's not hungry to learn to ski. He says, I'm scared. And he wants to stay behind your pole and like be cuddled up in there. And he's super happy. But like, and his brother, if I think it's too steep and I say, Otto, like come between my legs just for the first 3 turns on here. No, mama, no, I want to ski alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that speaks to what you're saying. We cannot really teach anyone anything. We can just like put on their ski pants and take them up the mountain and then hope that they want to learn it for themselves.
Right. And the way that they learn, the way that we all learn is by trusting our inner experience. And so the more anatomy and kinesiology we learn as it relates to our own locus of consciousness, to our own body, that enables us to communicate more clearly our experience and what works for us, which then invites other folks to do the same. Mom says all the time, trust yourself first. And, she's not saying trust yourself only. She's saying trust yourself first. And then you talk to folks like us and you get other opinions that can help support your trust, ideally. If it doesn't, run away. But, this is the thing, like we are our teachers. Life is our grand guru. And so the more we learn about how we're put together, we're actually put together, not what we look like, especially comparing ourselves to the, popular media that's out there, that none of that matters. What matters is our lived, felt experience and how we're feeling in our bodies. And I guarantee you, the more you learn about your own bony landmarks and how your joints are actually situated in your body, the more satisfying movement is going to feel to you and the more content you will feel. And that's what it's about.
The last thing I'll say, and then we'll open up the pocket anatomy model and look at the bones. I feel from so many years of yoga, exactly as you're saying, such a confidence in my own interoceptive awareness. And I was just doing a cold plunge. I'm getting really into cold plunging, and it was a new girl working at the place where I go, and I go in and sit for 10 minutes at 10 degrees Celsius. It's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And I've been going a ton. I bought like a membership. I've been going a ton the past couple months. And the new girl said like, oh, do you want me to sit in here with you while you do it? And I was like, no, I'm fine. I completely know. But I have this deep sense of trusting. Like I know exactly how to trust how I feel in this cold water. And I know I have a timer, but I know exactly that when I should get out if it's before the timer has gone, because I have trained that muscle, if you will, of like listening to the signals that are coming from my body. So I can't really imagine a situation where I'm going to be in there and I'm going to be like, I don't know, overwhelmed by how it feels and like be unwell, because I feel it starting to build up. Like, okay, it's time to get out, like,
yeah. And that is a learnable skill, right? To learn to listen to our bodies, to our, somatosensory signals, and to respect them. What happens often is we'll feel what's happening in our bodies and we'll override it we'll should all over ourselves,
Yeah.
And this is where yoga, asana practice in particular, can be so helpful, because each asana is a process of inquiry, of questioning what we're experiencing right here, right now, and how is the pose emerging from us, from within us. So often we're imposing images of what asana should look like when it's done correctly.
Absolutely. Here we are at Pocket Anatomy, looking at the pelvis, the female pelvis. So what are the key bony landmarks? Let's look at them here, and then we can feel them on our bodies.
I just have to take a moment and just be happy looking at the pelvis, because the pelvis is everything. It really is. So the transverse axis of movement at the hips intersects with the pelvis, and then the vertebral column meets the pelvis at sacrum at S1, and the vertebral column takes all of the weight and force of the universe and the body and translates it down into the big bones of the pelvis, into the big strong bones of the lower extremity. And so this is just something to visualize as we look at the pelvis as an image. Look at how complete it is as a region of the body. That's really cool. Okay. So what we're looking at when we look at the pelvis is, okay, we see the thigh bones coming into the hip sockets, the acetabula or the acetabular fossa. And then we see the pubic bones, and they come together at this little disc-like structure, the pubic symphysis. And it is really like an intervertebral disc in structure and composition, by the way. And we have that disc there because it helps absorb impact from walking, okay? Because you don't want your bones knocking into one another. And then if we let our eyes follow up the big hip bones, the ilia, they look like elephant ears. They're similar in shape to the actual ear of the body. Might be helpful. And I just want us to notice how large these bones are. And you may see, and I can see it quite clearly, but I'm a nerd and I look at anatomy apps a lot. You may notice that there's a lighter bony color on the curve, the front curve of the hip bone. Yep, right where Lucy has the arrow. Yep, in the red. And those are what I like to think of as the eyes of the hip bones. That's where the anterior superior iliac spine ends. And we can feel those, and we will here in a couple of minutes. And so we can just see the curves of these bones. Now below the ASIS, we have what's called the inferior iliac spine. We don't need to pay too much attention to that. You're not really gonna find it unless you're digging in there, which I don't recommend. And then we notice the top of the ilia. And this is important to know where the top of folks' hip bones are, because that's going to tell us if their pelvis is out of whack, which is an official kinesiologic term. But ideally, the tops of the ilia, the iliac crests, are on the same plane. But in some folks, one may be higher than the other. We'll talk about that a little bit. So that's from the front. And then you can also see, we're looking at the front of the body, and you see this triangular wedge-shaped bone, and that's the sacrum. And you can see there's a huge amount of surface area between the sacrum and the ilia.
Like this joint, you're saying?
That's the sacroiliac joint. And it is big and it is deep. It has to be, because it's a joint of stability. That joint right there, the two of them, there are two, a left and a right, the sacroiliac joints, they are the stabilizers of the pelvis and the vertebral column.
You know what's so cool? If I just click one level up, you can see all those ligaments pop in.
All of that beautiful connective tissue. You can see the capsular structures of the joint capsules. You can see some of the ligamentous structures. And when you look at this, like, you can see, holy macanoli, the SI joints and the hip joints are big weight-bearing joints. It's amazing. But structurally, so this is great. Let's keep with this view for a moment, Lizzie. You can see how the thigh bones come into these deep sockets in the pelvis. And so you know right away that that's a more mobile joint, right? Because it sits in a cup. But if we now remove the connective tissue and we look at the SI joints, they're almost like facet joints in the vertebral column.
Yeah, they're almost like, they just look like two bones coming together like that.
Yeah.
Rubbing up against each other.
Sagittal plane orientation. Yeah, it's really cool.
Anything you want us to look at from the back?
Yes. Okay, so now we look at the back, and you can see the back of the iliac crest, the tops of the ilia, and then you notice how the bones curve down toward the midline of the body. And you can sort of see this little notch right where the arrow is. And if you circle that, Lizzie, that little notch there, that's the posterior superior iliac spine. It's distal end, okay? And that is where we find our SI joints. That's where S2, sacrum 2, lies in most folks. And you can kind of see below that at S3, you can kind of see that hint of the articulation between the sacrum and the ilia. You see how they come together like this?
Here, yeah.
Yeah. And down below that, you see how the bones fit, and then you can see how the ilia overlap the sacrum.
Right here, right?
Yeah, so here at S3, you see how the sacrum, the sacrum and the ilia meet like this, like walls almost. But at the PSIS, holy machinoli, you can see how that bone covers the sacrum.
Okay, let's look at it in the body. Let's feel these points on our own body. So why don't we start with the rear view?
Okay, great. Okay, so first find your iliac crest. First find the tops of your hip bones, the ilia, and just put your hands on them. And right there, you know, that's the bottom of your waist. So if you're going to wear a belt on your waist, the belt would go above that crest.
Right.
See, fashion advice based on everything I made. Okay, so now, Lizzie, feel down toward the midline of your bottom. Start just feeling along the bones, just working your fingers in a bit, and you can feel those bony knobs. Yeah, that's your PSIS. Now, in some folks, if you know, they're not covered in fabric and clothing, you'll see little dimples there, and those are called the dimples of Venus. That's the vernacular. I learned that from Angela Farmer. But now we know that's where a lot of folks will have pain, is right where your thumbs are. And if you work your thumbs now toward the midline of your body, you're now on your sacrum.
It's so high, actually. I always think of my sacrum as here.
Yeah, the sacrum is long. It used to, you know, it's vestigially 7 vertebral bodies, you know? So work your fingers up toward your low back, Lizzie. Work your thumbs up over your toward your low back. And what do you, now you're on the top of your sacrum, right? And you feel in a bit, and you'll find you'll find lumbar 5. You'll feel the bottom lumbar. It's quite big. Yep.
Yeah, there.
And right below that is the top of the sacrum.
Yeah.
Technically the base of the sacrum. And that's where your low back, L5, meets the sacrum. And now work your fingers down towards your legs again. And what do you notice about that area?
It starts to curve out, the bone.
Yes. But at the top, it's in slightly. Yeah. Yeah. It's not pointing straight up, correct? You can feel the curve. Keep working your fingers down. That's called the angle of inclination. It's normal. You'll work down and you'll feel this ridge across. Yeah. So that is where we want to, when we're laying down on our back, that's what we want to lie on, is that seesaw ridge. Okay. And then when we tuck our posteriorly tilt our pelvis, we push into the, you know, the top of the sacrum near the low back. And then when we anteriorly rotate, when we move into extension, then we move our tailbone down to the floor. Okay. All right. So now keep working, come back to neutral and keep working your fingers down the ilia, find your PSIS, those bumps. And now we kind of always know where our tailbone is. But if you take one hand and just lay it on your sacrum with your fingertips pointing down toward the floor, we know that the tailbone is going to be below the middle finger. If you're comfortable feeling it, go ahead and feel it. You'll feel how it curves in.
Yeah.
But know that you're grabbing your own butt. Okay.
What can we feel here on the front?
Okay, so now let's find the iliac crest again. All right. And now wrap your fingers over the bones. Just let your fingers follow. And now feel down the front of the ilia. And you'll feel a bump. You'll feel bumps. Yep. Those are the ASIS. Those are the eyes of the hips. And what we want to know about the ASIS is, which direction are they pointing toward?
Forward? I feel like they're just pointing forward.
Great. So we know you're in neutral. But if the ASIS are, if you're tucking, in fact, let's do this. You can do it lying down or standing up. Go ahead and really tuck, posteriorly tilt. Which way do your ASIS go?
Now they lift up.
Exactly. They're looking up. Now really tilt, anteriorly tilt. And yep, your ASIS look down towards your feet.
Yes.
Okay. So what we're looking for when we're standing is we're looking for neutral.
In Tadasana.
In Tadasana. In Tadasana, we're looking for neutral. But let's say I'm going to do a back bend. I'm going to do bridge pose, any back bends. Which direction would we want the ASIS looking?
Down.
Toward the feet. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Not too down, because we don't want to jam up at L5 and the top of the sacrum, S1. Okay. But we want them moving in the direction of, right? And if we're tucking, let's say we're doing child's pose, which direction do we want the ASIS oriented? We're really, we're posteriorly tilting.
They're lifting up.
Correct. So if we're in child's pose, then we want the ASIS to, look toward our hearts.
So I'm going to reiterate this because it seems to Mary like a very obvious point, but to those of us mere mortals, it took me a while to really click into this. One principle from experiential anatomy and just frankly anatomical reality, and what Mary's touching on right now, is that no matter what position your body is in relationship to gravity, and we do that all the time in yoga, we do often the same position in standing, in lying down, on the belly. Like we do it in different relationships to gravity, but the bony landmarks are always telling us the same thing, if that makes sense. Like they're all, like tucking is tucking, whether we're standing or lying down.
Yes. Yes. This is why we need to know the bony landmarks and where they are when we're in neutral, when we're standing in Tadasana, in mountain pose. Because from that place of neutral, then when we start moving, creating different shapes with our structure, then we know what's happening in the joints. We know when we're tucking our tailbone, which we're not actually tucking the tailbone, we are posteriorly rotating the pelvis. We know then, oh, okay, well then what's happening in L5S1? What's happening with where my thigh bones are in relationship to the hip sockets? How does that play down to my feet? Through my knees. Do my knees pull up? If I'm lying down on my back and so I'm preparing for Shavasana and I really posteriorly tilt my pelvis, and do my knees pull up from the mat? Yes.
Pop quiz.
And so we know right then, if we're looking at someone and they're lying down on the floor and their knees are really pulling up from the mat, we know that they need to adjust their pelvis.
So good, Mary. So good. I'm going to show the websites one last time. You can find us here, experientialanatomy.yoga. Sign up for the newsletter. All the goodies are there. And Mary Richards is here. yogawithmaryrichards.com. Thank you so
much. My pleasure, Lizzie. It's so much fun.
I got to go cook my kids spaghetti.
Yay. I'll be over.
Bye.